Magali Part, on January 17, 1982, Eric Bertrand, a truck driver, and Evelyn, a housewife and stay-at-home mother, welcomed Magali into the world, was raised in the town of Langens, and was the oldest of 5 children. When she was 12 years old, her parents got divorced in 1994, and her father then moved to Switzerland to start a new life and get married again. Nevertheless, she stayed in touch with him, and they had a close relationship. Feeling hurt by the separation, Magali decided to stay in France and live with her mother. She met Jeffrey Part, a 23-year-old, on July 12, 1998, at the age of 16. Jeffrey was raised in a violent home. Jeffrey was placed in foster care for a portion of his childhood, while his father, Patrick, struggled with alcoholism. But as an adult, he had made amends and put his connection with his father back together. He had just spent a few days in jail after his ex-girlfriend accused him of domestic abuse when he first met Magali. After finding out about Jeffrey's past, Magali's mother voiced distaste for the young guy. After a falling out between mother and daughter, Magali moved in with her father and started working as a caregiver at a retirement community. The 18-year-old Magali wed Jeffrey in 2000. After relocating to the town of Ornex, Magali started working at a do-it-yourself store, and her husband found work as a painter and decorator. Magali fed Jeffrey breakfast on March 26, 2001, before he departed for work. That day, he wasn't scheduled to be at work, but for unknown reasons, he either chose to go in or was requested to. While they were eating, Magali informed him that she intended to walk their Rottweiler puppy to a convenience store to get cigarettes. It was just a 2.5-mile journey there and back. However, when Jeffrey got home at 4:30 from work, he found that neither his wife nor his new puppy were there. Since Magali had prepared breakfast, the kitchen had not been cleaned up. The 19-year-old was usually a tidy person who cleaned up after herself. So this was really strange. Jeffrey called Magali's parents, who had not seen her, out of concern. When he arrived at her job at around 5 o'clock in the evening, he discovered that she had not reported sick and had not shown up for her afternoon shift. After that, Jeffrey reported his wife missing at the police station. After that, he went back to his house and enlisted the aid of a friend with an ATV to assist him in his search for Magali. In order to get some rest, they decided to end the quest at around 5 in the morning. Around 11 in the morning, a young man who was picking mushrooms next to his uncle's farm found the body of a woman. She had been burned and was just half clothed. The man believed at first that someone had dropped a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he saw that his assumption was incorrect. After he ran to his uncle's farm, they made a police call. Investigators recognized the deceased as 19-year-old Mag Parties using the report that Jeffrey submitted, and personalized jewelry engraved with the couple's names and wedding dates. They found a chocolate bar wrapper, a knife with its blade wedged into a tree, and a cigarette but next to the body. They found a gasoline-filled Jerry, kin 300 meters away. After analysis, it was discovered that the cigarette but belonged to a Moroccan brand that was only available in Switzerland. Interestingly, investigators discovered no evidence of a fire at the site where Magali's body was discovered, indicating to them that she was killed elsewhere and her remains were subsequently disposed of in the woodlands. 2 days after Magali disappeared on March 28th, an autopsy was performed. She had been assaulted, sustaining 12 fractures across her body. The medical examiner was unable to ascertain the precise moment of her death because she had been burned later. In addition, Magali's cause of death has never been made public. Additionally, the ME found sperm within the 19-year-old's body, indicating that she had engaged in sexual activity 48 hours before to her passing. But there was nothing to suggest that she had experienced sexual assault. The ME discovered a prescription drug for anxiety inside her veins. Investigators were never able to locate a prescription for the medicine in Magali's name, and neither Jeffrey nor her family was aware that she was using it, even though Magali didn't smoke this brand. Further examination of the cigarette, but that was found at the site, revealed that her DNA was present. Even stranger, investigators discovered that the cigarette had been thrown away following the 19-year-old's passing. It also prompted law officials to speculate about the likelihood of manufactured scenes. Magali's possessions were not found with her death, and have not been found again in the years that have passed. However, the Rottweiler puppy showed up 5.5 miles from Ornix in the town of Kosvej, unhurt and hungry. The puppy was clean and dry even though it had been raining between the 26th and the 28th. She had the scent of Magley's fragrances too. She lost her leash, which has never been found, even though the dog might have interacted with the offender. Jeffrey received her back from the police instead of having her examined for forensic evidence. Following Magley's last known actions, the investigators discovered that the 19-year-old had gone out with 2 pals the day before she passed away. Investigators learned from one of the acquaintances that Magley had said her that year's birthday present of underwear was from Jeffrey's father, Patrick. Magley checked her voicemail and shut off her phone at 10 o'clock that same day. The man's uncle, who discovered her death that morning, said that his dogs had been barking non-stop for some time, maybe sensing someone in the woods. This happened at 2 and 5 in the morning. Regarding his role, Patrick doesn't seem to have ever addressed the fact that he gave lingerie to his daughter-in-law. Jeffrey dismissed the accusation as untrue. On the 26th, the day of Magley's disappearance, Patrick says he went to the couple's home at 10 in the morning to get the mail. But she wasn't there. The reason Patrick's mail was at the couple's house is unknown. Someone tried to withdraw about a 400 from an ATM on the 26th in the town of St. Jean-Pied at 1 p.m., but they were unable because they had entered the incorrect PIN. But this person also had Jeffrey's credit card, so they took a 35 out of his accounts. It seems that the unidentified person knew his PIN. The specifics of what happened are unknown, since we were unable to locate any information that would have explained how the murderer had gotten Jeffrey's credit card or whether or not he had reported it missing. Magley was in this same town on the day of her death between 9:30 and 11 a.m., according to 3 other eyewitnesses. Her family doesn't know how or why she came to be here. The 19-year-old didn't have a car, therefore it was a very lengthy walk for them to get Smokes on foot. Nonetheless, every eyewitness has acknowledged that they could not be positive that the young woman they saw was Magley. Magley's case has not received much media coverage throughout the years. Her family has been dissatisfied with the investigation's lack of progress and has regularly expressed their suffering to the media because the murder happened close to them. Given that the murder happened near the Swiss border, journalists there started to show an interest in the case and start discussing it, eventually exposing multiple shortcomings on the part of the police. They said that photos of tire tracks discovered at the scene had been lost, DNA samples had been lost, and then found again during the investigation. And the police had been so convinced that Magley was the victim of a random attack that they had not looked into other options in detail. The intensity of the attack suggested that the 19-year-old was the target of great anger. However, their automobiles were not inspected and friends, relatives, and co-workers were not appropriately questioned. Law police also thought that Magley had been seen that day in a different place by the eyewitnesses. They therefore did not look into alternative hypotheses and firmly felt that she had vanished at the time of her last sighting. Jeffrey, Magley's spouse, was excluded from consideration as a suspect due to his unwavering alibi and non-existence of 3 years after her passing in 2004. It was found that the 19-year-old had missed multiple days of work in the months before the crime. Nevertheless, this information was unknown to Jeffrey and the other family members. 2 years later, Patrick and Jeffrey were detained by the police and interrogated. In the end, they were freed because there was insufficient evidence to connect either man to the crime. Although Jeffrey has never disclosed the identity of the attacker to the public, it is said that he knows who they are. When Magley vanished, according to his father, who was questioned over the lingerie episodes, he was at home. His alibi's degree of tightness is unknown. Since then, there have been very little updates on Magley's situation. Eric, her father, organized fundraisers in 2015 to enable the family to employ a private detective. The private investigation company confirmed to media what they already knew. The police made numerous mistakes during the initial investigation and might have overlooked important details as a result. Magley's body was excavated in 2016 to conduct more analysis, but no meaningful results were obtained. Jeffrey, Magley's husband, remarried and had 4 children with his new spouse after she passed away. He committed suicide on September 15, 2018. Magali's parents are unsure on how to handle his suicide as well, whether it sprung from sorrow over losing Magali or from guilt. His new wife claims the murder haunted the couple for the whole of their marriage, despite the fact that he made no reference of his murdered wife in his suicide notes. Fingerprints were found on the cigarette, but that was recovered from the crime scene after a re-examination in 2020. But they belonged to an unidentified person. The prints was too strong for Jeffrey or his father Patrick. The case is still unresolved. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Chupko Bender. Susan Robin Bender, Patricia Chupko Bender's only child, was born on November 27, 1970 in Modesto, California. On April 25, 1986, 15-year-old Susan left her family's home to spend the weekend at her friend's beachside home in Carmel. She strolled by herself to the Greyhound bus station at 10th and G Street. While Susan was waiting for the bus, she ran into several friends. She told them about her trip to the shore and that she would be back in a few days. After their conversation, Susan called someone on the payphone at the depot. A full-size 1977 Ford van with an olive green appearance pulled up 10 minutes later. Susan got into the vehicle. This is where Susan was last seen. It was common for a 15-year-old to enjoy this much independence in the 1980s. Patricia Bender, Susan's mother, assumed her daughter had made it to Carmel safely and was having fun with her friends. When Susan failed to make the customary phone call home, her mother became concerned. She reported her daughter missing on May 1, 1986. The police came to the conclusion that Susan had met a horrific end quite fast. A detective informed the local newspaper, "We have specific evidence that suggests foul play was involved in Susan Bender's disappearance." Susan's mother told the same newspaper that even though Susan had run away from home twice before, she had always come back pretty fast. Patricia mentioned that our relationship had been going well for a few months before she disappeared. She showed no indication that she intended to flee. She said that Susan's clothes, diaries, and phone book had been found in the possession of an unidentified male subject of interest. Patricia said, "I fear that a man who was questioned by the police but was never taken into custody attacked her. They had a ton of circumstantial evidence against him, but they decided not to take him into custody." Susan's disappearance was never considered voluntary by the authorities. Detective Richard Rodinier informed a journalist in 1987 that he thought Susan was definitely dead. Rodinier worked on the investigation until he retired in 2000. In a 1999 interview with Susan's mother, the police claim that in the absence of a body, is not much they can do. Detective Ridenhorst stated that Susan Bender simply vanished off the face of the planet in that same year. The most bizarre aspect of this case is that no one has ever come forward to reveal what happened to her, and no information about her has arisen over the years. In 1999, young ladies in the surrounding Stockton region were also the target of two childhood friends from Linden, California, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Skirmentine. One could speculate that Susan was one of their victims. Many of their victims are still unknown. Even though the authorities were unaware of it, it's probable that the men were involved in Susan's kidnapping, even though she vanished while they were busy carrying out their nefarious plans. Their victim-focused approach was congruent with Susan's disappearance. But after years of research, Susan's case had never been linked to the crimes of Skirmentine or Herzog. The two bad companions went on a rampage between 1980 to 1990. Several ladies may have been among the 15 or more individuals they slaughtered. Susan's case, meanwhile, remained unresolved for nearly 40 years. Investigators spoke with friends and relatives who had fought to keep Susan's tale intact. Sandy Silveria, a friend of Susan's, remarked in 2021, "Where is she? What happened to her? Whoever did this needs to be held responsible." In an attempt to locate the long-lost teenager, the Modesto Police Department announced in October 2021 that they had revived the investigation. "We found possible areas of opportunity in this case review that could help advance this case. This includes using technical breakthroughs," the agency said in a statement. "We also believe that considering the circumstances surrounding the crime, there may be unidentified individuals who have knowledge of crucial information regarding Susan's disappearance. In the years since Susan disappeared, Investigators investigating into cold cases in Modesto had anticipated that additional witnesses might feel compelled to come forward. The police agency said in a statement from 2022 that it was important to remember Susan was a small child living with a family. Unfortunately, it has taken the family 36 years to get justice or closure. It is our duty as a group to assist in bringing some sort of resolution to the situation while still working for justice. At last, the Modesto Police Department announced Raymond Lewis Stafford's arrest on Thursday, August 17, 2023. On August 15, 2023, Lewis, who is currently 76 years old, was taken into custody in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas, where he had been living for almost 5 years. Stafford appeared to be living in plain sight for many years. Detectives were able to acquire an arrest warrant on August 10th, but the Texas Van Zant County Sheriff's Department didn't show up at his house and take him into custody until Tuesday. After being captured without incident and being put into the Van Zant County Jail, he was charged with Susan's murder. More details about what the Modesto police think occurred to Susan were not disclosed. While he awaits extradition to California, Raymond Lewis is now being held in custody in Texas. How precisely the detective focused on him as a possible suspect is unknown. Modesto police have been posing several unanswered questions to the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, but they say they don't have any further information to provide. Newspapers and local radio stations got in touch with the Stanislaus County District Attorney and the Modesto Police Department to inquire about what transpired prior to the suspect being taken into custody. However, they did not hear back. Regarding Susan's cause of death, whether her body could be located or the new evidence that led to Raymond Lewis's indictment, none of this information was made public. In a press release, Modesto police praised the California Department of Justice, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, and multiple Texas authorities for their support during the difficult and lengthy investigation. It said that the resolution of Susan Robin Bender's case was made possible by these agencies working together. Almost immediately after they began to suspect foul play, detectives had a suspect. Lewis was arrested 1 month after Susan vanished on suspicion of committing a different burglary, according to court records filed in Stanislaus County. At the time, authorities used the green van to find Lewis. His name had not been released to the public at that point. They found out throughout their inquiry that Susan's mother, Patricia Bender, had had a brief collaboration with Raymond Stafford Lewis. At the time, Patricia claimed she suspected that after contacting their home phone, Lewis might have grown close to her daughter. Patricia briefly worked for Stafford Lewis at his security company in 1985, according to court documents. They also mentioned that she had dated Lewis a few times. Susan was familiar with Lewis. At the bus stop, Susan had been seen getting into his rented van. She allegedly stepped into his van without hesitation, according to her acquaintance who was at the bus stop the day she disappeared. In the 1980s, Raymond Stafford allegedly confessed to killing a woman by strangling her with a wire or cable and burying her close to the Big Oak Flat Yosemite entrance, according to a former resident of Stafford's home. He said that he drove to a campground near the Big Oak Flat entrance to Yosemite National Park and excavated the grave, according to court records that were retrieved. The 38-year-old Raymond Stafford filed to run for Modesto City Council in the months after Susan vanished. In July 1985, he told the local newspaper that his criminal past was just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time when they asked about it. According to his arrest documents, he was operating an unregistered private investigation business while donning a badge designating him as a private investigator. Stafford stated that the primary goal of his campaign was to pass legislation protecting children from predators. "We don't waste any time pursuing those who are bothering our kids," he said. Unsurprisingly, he failed to win an election. 5 months later, in December 1986, Stafford was found guilty of setting a company on fire after he acknowledged making a fraudulent police complaint. He allegedly staged a kidnapping in order to avoid appearing in court. In 1994, he came back on a law enforcement's radar. He was registered as an offender on the offender registry under the identity Greg Tunningly for the abuse of a 13-year-old girl in California. New court filings identified the individual as Stafford. Patricia Bender revealed that after learning that the two had a covert relationship, she had always assumed Stafford was the cause of her daughter's disappearance. Patricia said, "I've known since the beginning when my daughter went missing. I've known all along that he was the one responsible. The investigators disregarded my statement to them." Patricia went on to claim that the idea had been a part of her for the preceding 37 years. She continued, "To be honest, I felt like I was lost. It was as if I were a wandering dead woman. It stings to hear other people talk about their kids and grandchildren." Patricia stated that the recollections of her 15-year-old daughter served as her source of inspiration. She thought about Susan's gregarious personality. She was a hilarious person. Patricia explained that she was simply a normal teenager trying to figure out who she was. Patricia Bender was tenacious, but her hunt for her daughter had been agonizing up until now. She spoke about needing to rely on her religion. She said, "I'm grateful. I'm relieved that the system has finally decided to do something and stop keeping me in the dark." Those closest to Susan hope to locate her in order to give her the send-off they have always felt she deserves. In the last act, her mother finally admits that she has never had trouble forgiving Stafford. "It may sound strange to say, but I have moved past his cruelty toward my kid. Since I don't want to bear that weight for the rest of my life, I really have." Patricia said this arrest has cleared a big cloud off her shoulders. "I'm not really excited about how the trial will go at this stage. All I want to do is find Susan's body." In her final statement, she stated, "My message is a simple one. Now pay attention to your kids." Moving on to the next case. Karen Moore? On June 26, 2001, the day before her birthday, 52-year-old Karen Moore, a Caucasian lady from Davie, Florida, left her house at 7 p.m., never to return. On the following day, Christina, her 8-year-old daughter, would return from summer camp in honor of her mother's birthday. But her mother would not be present to see her. Where could Karen have disappeared to? Was her disappearance connected to any illegal activity? When will she come back? Up until now, Christina had spent a long 22 years searching for the answers to these issues. Greetings and welcome back to Mystery Detective, the channel dedicated to narrating the stories of some of the most notorious unsolved cases in the United States and abroad. We are looking at a cold case that was unsolved for 22 years before being solved in 2023. Join us as we start to solve this mystery. Davie is a small suburban hamlet in Broward County, Florida that combines the energy of Western-themed attractions with the coziness of a tight-knit community. The city's year-round sunshine, pleasant climate, and easy access to beaches or draws for both visitors and residents. Davie is well recognized for accommodating college students because it is the hub of multiple university campuses. Davie has a wealth of leisure activities, a top-notch school, and a welcoming community. Our case begins here in this lovely city today. Thomas Stewart Moore and Olga Charlotte Moore welcomed a daughter into the world on June 27, 1948. They christened her Karen Elizabeth Moore. Pam was the name of her sister as well. As a child, Karen enjoyed hiking, sailing, cooking, and playing the piano. Travel has always been Karen's passion, even as a small child. It never occurred to anyone that she would go and never come back. She graduated in 1968 with an associate's degree in art and in 1979 with a bachelor's degree in science with a nursing concentration in 2001. 53-year-old Karen Elizabeth Moore and her spouse were going through a divorce. A restraining order was in place against him. Their 8-year-old daughter Christina was given full custody by Karen. Karen was employed as a nurse at the Boca Raton Retirement Community, Edgeway Estates, before to her abduction. She also never wavered in her resolve to providing Christina with a solid upbringing, even though she worked full-time. She sought to see that Christina enjoyed the best possible years. Christina also remembers Karen as a devoted mother. Karen made time for Christina despite her job as a nurse by taking her to the zoo and doing other things together. All she wanted was for her daughter to grow up happy and healthy. But this family's cheerful picture will soon give way to a depressing one that was full of unsolved mysteries. Karen was due to turn 53 on June 27, 2001. Christina had come home from Girl Scout camp to celebrate with her mother, but Karen wasn't there to greet her. Christina realized something wasn't right when Karen didn't come pick her up. Given that Karen worked as a nurse, it made sense that she would be distracted at work. But Karen was always there for her daughter, and if she had to go to work, she would have sent someone else to pick Christina up. It was an unusual circumstance. As the day went on, the story that followed expanded by the hour. The last time anyone saw Karen was on June 26, 2001 at 6:30 p.m., when she hired her neighbor's son to mow her grass. She drove away from the house in her white 1999 Saturn at around 7 o'clock in the evening. No one knew where she might have gone or why she had gone outside. Karen's sister Pam, Kleiss, phoned the police after waiting for her for hours, and she still hadn't arrived at the residence. Pam claimed that she had requested her former husband to pick up Christina from camp the day Karen disappeared before she departed for work. Before leaving the house, she later had a brief talk with the son of her neighbor. What transpired following these episodes is unknown. She had a job to report for the next day. Karen worked at Edge Point Estates, a retirement community, for 8 years, and her executive director, Keith Cradle, noted her dependable and responsible work history. Would have alerted the establishment if there had ever been an urgent duty because she was such a passionate worker. Everyone knew how much Christina meant to her, even herself. It was obvious that Karen had not left on her own initiative. Was there more at play here, or was this just a terrible accident? As suspicions grew, so did the police's limited resources in their search for Karen Moore. The first thing they needed to do was track her car. Karen disappeared inexplicably while operating a white 1999 Saturn four-door with the license plate due to who there was an Indiana State University sticker on the rear of her automobile. The public had access to all of this information's details. Detective James Frank, whiz of the Davie Police Department, received a tip that a woman had soon reported seeing the identical car in South Miami-Dade County. But the story was unsubstantiated and unsupported by any other witnesses. In a desperate attempt to advance the investigation, the police released a missing poster detailing Karen's looks. The posters featured her with brown hair, brown eyes, and glasses. Her height was given as 5 feet, 4 inches. In an attempt to locate Karen, the police were looking for leads, but they were not finding any. The initial survey of her house was enough to warn of terrible news. At home, her phone, suitcase, and whole clothing were found. Upon careful examination, there were no signs of forced entry or trespassing at her residence. Although the detective deduced that Karen had to have left the house willingly, the reason behind her departure remained a mystery. The public was notified by Detective James Francois that the police were looking into Karen Moore's phone and banking records. When there was no activity on her credit card or bank account, he instantly ruled out theft or robbery. This suggested that Karen was in a very bad place. She would have required money to sustain herself as she still had all of her needs at home. Karen's family wanted the police to search for her using a helicopter, but they were unable to do so because they did not know the route Karen may take. Karen Moore had vanished from sight entirely. Days progressed into weeks. Weeks into months, and months into years passed while Karen's family waited for a return. Despite the Moore family and the entire police department displaying missing person posters with incentives. Years and years went by and Karen never returned. Her daughter, Christina, married and had children of her own. But Karen's whereabouts from that day remained a mystery. On January 6, 2023, Britton Lockhart, a scuba diver, and the owner of the YouTube channel Depths of History, John Mike Sullivan and Michael Rodriguez, who were leading the Sunshine State sonar team in their investigation of the surrounding water bodies in Broward County. They used state-of-the-art sonar equipment to find an automobile in a Davie retention pond. When Michael's underwater sonar devices began to light up, the entire team understood they had hit automobile wheels in the water. Before discovering the automobile, they spent roughly 15 minutes looking for it. When Britton swam down to investigate, she found a license plate buried 3 feet below the surface of the muck in an exposed trunk. They were convinced they had found something important, but they didn't know exactly what it was, or if it had anything to do with any previous incidents. Britton Lockhart immediately called the Davie Police Department. Even though Karen vanished inexplicably 22 years ago, the Davie police were still aware of her whereabouts. When they arrived at the location the next day, they had to send the divers back into the sea. After being pulled out of the water, the automobile was taken for further examination. The car that Karen was driving at the time of her disappearance fit the description. The license plate on Karen's car was found to be dusty. It was a noteworthy discovery in this 22-year-old instance. Pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Later on, it was established that Karen Moore had been inside the car when it crashed into the lake after 2 bones were found inside. It was finally revealed to them what had become to Karen Moore. Despite the fact that the entire search operation was broadcast live on YouTube, Lockhart and Rodriguez were not allowed to talk about the case's particulars. Due to suspicions of foul play, the search teams and the Moore family were not allowed to speak with the police about the case. Christina has finally found closure on the whats, hows, and whys of her mother's disappearance. Questions that have persisted for 22 years. Karen disappeared without explanation, leaving Christina in her family's care. She would never be able to duplicate the love and intimacy she felt with her mother. She had a lot of ups and downs in her early years. She even went into foster care for a while. During these moments, she would miss her mother and hope that she would be discovered or returned to her. Every young girl desires and hopes to have their mother by her side at every stage of life. My personal birthdays, the dates I got engaged, married, and had my 2 children. Christina stated in a sorrowful interview that they never got to know their grandmother. Christina had definitely had a close relationship with her mother. Even after all these years in 2021. She made a post on TikTok complaining about how she wished she had spent a little more time with her mother. After 22 long years, Christina finally found out what had happened to her mother. Christina was thankful to the police and search teams for enabling her to bring Karen back home and give her a peaceful burial. Even though she was unable to find all the answers to the issues that had plagued her for years, the case of Karen Moss's disappearance is still being investigated. Police and Davie emailed Fox News Digital to let them know that they had spoken with the detectives but couldn't say further because they were worried it would jeopardize the investigation's prospects of being successful. Then came the next set of urgent questions when Karen's body was found in the pond. How did Karen end up falling into the pond? What was this crime's intended outcome? If the police's suspicions are true, then who was responsible for the 22 years of pain that Christina and the Moore family endured? Now that Karen has returned home after 22 years away, there is yet hope for her. There was some degree of success, thanks to Sono Systems' technology developments and the dedication of the police department. Though at this point the answers are unclear, Karen's justice may be just around the corner. Never be reluctant to share your knowledge. Your expertise might be essential to unlocking a long-standing enigma. Fernanda Maciel on Saturday, February 10, 2018. A woman sat down to enjoy a simple meal of beans and pico de gallo lovingly made by her mother, Paula. After eating, she stepped outside the house. The photos taken that day would be the last ever captured of her. Her disappearance quickly captivated the nation of Chile, stirring both widespread interest and deep concern. Fernanda Maciel was a small woman, reportedly under 5 feet tall. But what made her vanishing especially shocking was that she was 32 weeks or 7 months pregnant. What left both investigators and the public baffled was the absence of any clear reason for her disappearance. She was in a happy relationship with a boyfriend her family supported, and they were getting ready to move into a new home together. But when the truth about what happened to Fernanda came to light, it was so chilling that it shook the entire country. A word of caution. Some of the following details are deeply unsettling. The day Fernanda disappeared, her mother, Paula, noticed something unusual. Fernanda was unusually quiet. Paula later recalled that her daughter didn't interact with her younger siblings the way she normally did. There were no casual conversations or playful moments. She simply ate in silence. Then, at exactly 5:29 p.m., Fernanda left their home on Piñego Street, taking only her phone and keys with her. She crossed the intersection onto La Lima Road, a path she had taken countless times before, but this time she never came back. Paula waited for hours, her worry growing with each passing minute. When Fernanda's phone began going straight to voicemail, it became clear that something was wrong. The fact that she was nearing the end of her pregnancy made the situation all the more alarming. On February 11th, the day after Fernanda vanished, her mother Paula and her boyfriend, Luis Peterson, who was also the father of her unborn child, filed a missing persons report. Chile's national police force, the Carabineros, began the investigation. However, since there were no immediate signs of foul play, the more specialized unit, the Policía de Investigaciones de Chile, PDI, was not yet involved. The Carabineros distributed missing person posters, circulated information on social media, and interviewed residents in the area. Their most significant lead came from security footage confirming that Fernanda was last seen crossing Pago Street at 5:29 p.m. Oddly, no additional surveillance cameras picked up her movements after that. A local resident, Ortega Migno, claimed he saw her walking toward the Andes Mountains, but that lead went nowhere. Despite persistent search efforts, weeks passed, then months with no significant progress. Fernanda's social media accounts remained silent. Her bank activity was non-existent and no reliable sightings were reported. As her due date approached, the disappearance grew even more baffling. Many feared the worst, but Fernanda's family refused to lose hope. They remained unwavering in their efforts, determined to find answers and bring her home. To fully grasp the circumstances surrounding Fernanda's disappearance, it's important to delve into her background. Fernanda Damaris Maciel Correa was born on September 5, 1996 in Independencia, Santiago, Chile. After her parents separated in 1999, her mother Paula raised Fernanda and her siblings on her own, eventually relocating the family to Calacara. At first, Fernanda adapted well to these changes. She performed well in school, had a bright and positive personality, and maintained a relationship with her father. However, things began to shift during her teenage years. Her academic performance declined. She became more irritable, and tensions with classmates, siblings, and even her mother grew more frequent. Worried about her daughter's well-being, Paula turned to school counselors for support. In February 2007, Fernando was enrolled in a program designed for at-risk youth, but the intervention failed to make a lasting difference. She frequently stayed out late and sometimes didn't come home at all. Police often found her with teenagers who were involved in drug use. And over time, Fernando began to adopt their habits, gradually falling into substance abuse herself. Though she continued living with her family, Fernando became increasingly distant. She spent most of her time sleeping and only left the house to meet friends and feed her addiction. Her school performance worsened, eventually forcing her to repeat a grade. Then tragedy struck on July 2, 2012. Her father passed away suddenly from a stroke. Heartbroken, she got a tattoo of his name and his memory, but his death only deepened her downward spiral of self-destruction. Family members tried to intervene, but their efforts often led to explosive arguments. She began drinking heavily, frequently spending nights away from home. Despite these struggles, she managed to barely graduate high school and eventually found a job as a nightclub hostess. Unfortunately, the environment only reinforced her unhealthy lifestyle. She went through a series of unstable relationships, continuing on a downward spiral until she met Luis Peterson, a 36-year-old taxi driver. Luis seemed to genuinely care for Fernanda, and he even gained Paula's trust, becoming a welcome presence in their home. Under his influence, Fernanda started turning her life around. She reduced her drug use significantly, and while her relationship with Luis wasn't without occasional drama, it was relatively stable. Jealousy sometimes caused tension, such as the time Fernandez scratched Luis's taxi in a fit of rage, but such incidents were rare. Eventually, she left her nightclub job and took a position as a waitress at a local restaurant, a healthier work environment. However, when her employer discovered she was pregnant, she was fired. This time, instead of falling back into old patterns, Fernanda fought back. She filed a complaint with the labor inspectorate and was successfully reinstated at her job. By the time of her disappearance, Fernanda had made significant strides in turning her life around. She was determined to create a better future, and was eagerly anticipating the birth of her baby daughter. As weeks passed with no sign of her, frustration within her family grew. On March 5, 2018, after nearly a month of unanswered questions, Fernanda's relatives officially filed a complaint against the Carabineros, criticizing their handling of the case. This led to the involvement of the Policía de Investigaciones de Chile, PDI, a more specialized investigative unit known for solving complex criminal cases. The PDI wasted no time in exploring multiple theories to explain Fernanda's disappearance. One of the earliest theories was that she had simply run away, possibly after an argument with Luis or to reunite with a former lover. This idea gained traction in the media when a couple vacationing in San Carlos de Bariloche, Argentina, claimed to have seen a woman resembling Fernanda who appeared to have undergone cosmetic surgery. Desperate for answers, Paula traveled to Argentina to investigate the lead. However, after extensive searching, she firmly dismissed the runaway theory. She insisted Fernanda would never have left home without her belongings and had been excited about moving into the new home Luis was building for their growing family. The next theory investigators examined was the drug connection. Although Fernanda had distanced herself from that lifestyle, rumors surfaced that she had been spotted with a known drug dealer, Alexander Oysen, and his partner, Maria Aria, the day before she vanished. Witnesses claimed she had been holding a package during their meeting. However, both Oysen and Aria provided solid alibis and were eventually ruled out. Attention then shifted to Joel Cuevas Flores, a local drug trafficker and one of Fernanda's former romantic partners. There were allegations that Cuevas' girlfriend, Francesca Orellana, had threatened Fernanda a year before she disappeared. However, during questioning, while both were in custody for unrelated charges, investigators found no connection between them and Fernanda's case, leading to their clearance as suspects. Another possibility was the accident theory. Some speculated that Fernanda might have suffered a fatal accident while traveling along the road that day. However, there was no physical evidence to support this idea, and security cameras failed to capture any unusual incidents. With no signs of a crash, investigators dismissed this theory rather quickly. Some also considered the possibility that Fernanda had taken her own life. However, her friends and family strongly rejected this idea, emphasizing that she had been excited about her pregnancy and actively planning for her baby's future. Additionally, there was no history of severe depression that would suggest such an outcome. A kidnapping theory was also explored, but the lack of ransom demands or any physical evidence made this scenario highly unlikely. Detectives weighed the possibility that her past drug use, if not her own, then her past associations might have led to a violent retaliation, perhaps over unresolved debts. Yet, as with all other theories, no concrete evidence emerged to support this claim. With these leads exhausted, investigators turned their focus to specific individuals in Fernanda's life. Several potential suspects surfaced, each with possible motives and opportunities. The first was her boyfriend, Luis Peterson. While their relationship seemed stable, it wasn't without problems. Friends revealed that Fernanda had expressed concerns about Luis's temper, describing him as sometimes controlling and verbally aggressive. Luis admitted they had arguments, but denied ever being physically abusive. "We had our disagreements like any couple," he stated, "but we were excited about our daughter's birth." Authorities conducted a thorough investigation verifying his alibi, which placed him far from Fernanda's last known location. Despite lingering doubts about the nature of their relationship, no evidence linked him to any wrongdoing, and he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Another suspect was a local taxi driver who had interacted with Fernandez frequently. Friends reported that he had been overly persistent, frequently asking for her number and offering her baby clothes. However, the driver denied harassing her, claiming that she had willingly shared her contact information with him after he had once driven her to a hospital for a medical issue. Despite his claims, recovered text messages from Fernandez's phone suggested she had accused him of being too pushy. Even so, the driver provided a verifiable alibi, and forensic tests on his vehicle found no evidence of foul play. As a result, he too was ruled out. The next group of individuals under scrutiny were Fernandez's co-workers at the restaurant where she was employed. While some acknowledged her recent attempts to improve her life, others described her as difficult to work with, citing frequent disputes over tips and tardiness. One supervisor admitted, "None of us really liked her." However, investigators found no clear motive or opportunity linking her disappearance to any of her colleagues, and they were all eventually ruled out. But there was one person in Fernanda's life who stood out, her longtime friend and neighbor, Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos. The two had known each other for over a decade, and on the day she went missing, it was widely known that she had planned to meet him at the winery and warehouse where he worked. Security footage captured Fernanda walking in that direction at 5:29 p.m., but curiously, there was no footage of her actually entering the warehouse. When questioned, Felipe admitted that he had planned to meet Fernanda that day, but claimed she never showed up. At 8:05 p.m., he even sent her a WhatsApp message saying, "You never came, dude. I waited for you secretly." However, investigators found his version of events suspicious and decided to take a closer look at his actions in the days that followed. Just 2 days later, surveillance footage showed Felipe carrying a 25-kilogram bag of cement into the warehouse, a recent purchase that had no connection to his job duties. This raised immediate red flags. Then, on February 13th, he was caught on camera inspecting security cameras along La Lama Street, appearing to check whether they had recorded the warehouse entrance. Even more incriminating was the fact that he had enlisted the help of a friend, Christian Lobos Trujillo, to assist him. Christian later told the police that Felipe had specifically asked whether the cameras were pointed at the warehouse. The following day, February 14th, Felipe abruptly resigned from his job. This was unusual because when he had first been hired, he assured his employers that he intended to stay for at least a year. His sudden departure added to the growing suspicions around him. Early in the investigation, the Carabineros had conducted searches at both the warehouse and Felipe's home, but had found no concrete evidence of foul play. Still, the PDI remained skeptical of his alibi, even as the case went cold and updates became scarce. Then, nearly 16 months later, in June 2019, a breakthrough occurred. A woman came forward with a shocking testimony. Wishing to remain anonymous, she was referred to as Nancy. She revealed that Felipe had confessed to her about killing Fernanda. According to Nancy, Felipe admitted that he had indeed met Fernanda at the warehouse on February 10th. They smoked a joint together and talked, but the conversation took a dark turn when Felipe brought up his ex-girlfriend, who he claimed was extorting him. Fernanda allegedly became confrontational, and in the heat of the moment, Felipe pushed her, fell, hitting her head against a piece of furniture, and started convulsing. Panicking, Felipe tried to help her, but when she became unresponsive, he didn't know what to do. In his frantic state, he decided to bury her in the warehouse's backyard. Initially, when Nancy confronted him about his confession, he insisted he had made it up out of stress. At first, she believed him, but as time passed, she noticed a change in his behavior. He was constantly paranoid, always looking over his shoulder. He kept begging me not to tell anyone what he said. She recalled, "That's when I realized he wasn't lying. He might have actually done it acting on Nancy's tip." Investigators returned to the warehouse on June 24th, 2019. What they found not only confirmed their worst fears, it was far more disturbing than Nancy had described. That day, forensic teams and police officers arrived at the warehouse on La Lima Street and began excavating the backyard, which was littered with rubble and partially covered by overgrown bushes. Carefully, they used hand tools to clear the area, digging about 35 centimeters into the soil when they struck something solid. Beneath the dirt, they uncovered a concrete slab measuring approximately 115 by 50 centimeters with a thickness of 5 centimeters. What they would discover beneath, it would finally reveal the tragic fate of Fernanda. As investigators continued digging, they noticed a whitish powder later confirmed to be lime. They carefully excavated further until they uncovered a white shoe still attached to a human foot. This was the first undeniable indication that they had found a body. As they dug deeper, they discovered a white tarp tightly wrapped around the remains. The body was positioned in a forced fetal posture with the hands bound by cloth. Despite the time that had passed, It was remarkably well preserved, almost unmistakably Fernanda. Her dress had been pulled up to her waist, exposing her lower body, and her underwear was torn and displaced. These details strongly suggested that she had been the victim of a violent assault before her death. Investigators noted that the body appeared mummified, seemingly preserved by the lime and cement that had encased it. Paula, Fernanda's mother, was immediately called to the scene. Upon arrival, she was devastated. She recognized Fernanda's earrings and clothing at first sight. Forensic experts then confirmed what the family had feared through fingerprint analysis and identifying tattoos. The remains were officially identified as Fernanda Maciel Correa. A preliminary examination was conducted by the on-site forensic team led by Dr. Vivian Bustos Bacuretzo. The mummified state of the body, devoid of insect activity, indicated that it had been buried shortly after death, minimizing exposure to external elements. During the autopsy, a crucial discovery was made: a fracture in Fernanda's hyoid bone, a U-shaped structure in the neck above the larynx. This type of fracture is commonly linked to strangulation. Further analysis revealed hemorrhagic infiltrates, areas of internal bleeding within the neck muscles, including the sternothyroid and sternohyoid. Additionally, compression injuries were observed in the larynx and trachea, confirming that Fernanda had been strangled either manually or with a ligature. Around her neck, investigators found a piece of tightly knotted canvas, which had been used to strangle her. The force applied was enough to fracture her hyoid bone and inflict other visible injuries. Experts concluded that the strangulation had likely induced premature labor, causing her water to break. Tragically deprived of oxygen, the fetus suffocated as amniotic fluid filled its lungs. Due to the pressure from the cement slab and surrounding soil compressing Fernanda's body, the fetus was expelled post-mortem. Near the burial site, investigators found crucial evidence: a set of rusty keys with a heart-shaped keychain that belonged to Fernanda, a black bra and pink underwear, both torn, bearing clear signs of a violent struggle. Additionally, they uncovered a cement wrapper from the brand Sin1, matching the cement Felipe had purchased on February 12, 2018. These findings painted a grim picture of both premeditation and an attempt to conceal a brutal crime. Surveillance footage played a vital role in piecing together the timeline of Fernanda's disappearance. The evidence against Felipe was mounting and the investigation was closing in on the truth. On February 10, 2018, surveillance footage captured Felipe arriving at the warehouse on his bicycle. Just 12 minutes later, Fernanda was recorded leaving her home, making her way towards the warehouse and crossing Pago Street before disappearing from view behind dense vegetation. At 5:33 p.m., two dogs were seen exiting the warehouse, likely led out by Felipe after Fernanda had been led inside. Between 5:33 p.m. and 7:34 p.m., the crime is believed to have taken place. At 7:34 p.m., Felipe was seen leaving the warehouse on his bicycle. However, instead of heading directly home, which was located right next to Fernanda's house, he took a longer circular route. Investigators later interpreted this as an attempt to avoid suspicion, possibly driven by guilt. 2 days later, on February 12th, Felipe was caught on camera purchasing a 25-kilogram bag of San Juan cement from a hardware store in Conchili. The light blue bag bearing the same brand logo was later discovered at the crime scene. He returned to the store shortly afterward, this time purchasing mortar. Both times he transported the materials by bicycle. The following day, February 13th, he was seen inspecting surveillance cameras along the street. And on February 14th, he suddenly resigned from his job at the warehouse. Investigators believe these actions were deliberate attempts to cover his tracks and evade detection. Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos went on trial on March 6, 2013, facing overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. The case involved testimony from over 58 witnesses and the expertise of 41 forensic specialists. Prosecutors underscored the brutality of the crime, emphasizing Fernanda's vulnerability as a pregnant woman who had trusted Felipe, a longtime friend of more than a decade. Despite his lawyer's attempts to request a retrial, the evidence against him was damning. The prosecution pushed for the harshest sentence possible, citing the premeditated nature of the crime, his complete lack of remorse, and the sheer brutality of what had occurred. Felipe's inconsistent and delayed statements further damaged his credibility. He failed to provide a clear account of events until December 20th, 2020, nearly 34 months after Fernanda's disappearance. By that time, investigators had already uncovered crucial evidence, including the location of her body, the cause of death, and the fact that he was the only person with access to the warehouse that day. His late testimony held little value compared to the facts already established. Cesar Gonzalez, the warehouse owner, and Christian Rivera, the manager, confirmed that both were on vacation that day, leaving Felipe as the sole person with keys to the warehouse. He had been tasked with handling odd jobs and taking care of the dogs. Furthermore, Fernanda had confided in her close friend, Nicholas, that she was going to meet Felipe at the warehouse, further placing him at the scene. The condition of Fernanda's body painted a chilling picture of what had transpired. Her dress had been pulled up, exposing her lower body, and her torn underwear strongly suggested sexual violence. These signs pointed to an even more horrific crime than what Felipe had confessed to Nancy. Additionally, he repeatedly lied to investigators and Fernanda's mother, insisting that she had never arrived at the warehouse despite knowing she was already dead. Felipe had sent multiple WhatsApp messages to Fernanda on the day she disappeared, and afterward pretending he had no knowledge of what had happened to her. Additionally, he asked a company employee to provide false information about the time he returned the warehouse keys to friends and family. He feigned concern over Fernanda's disappearance while fabricating excuses for purchasing lime, claiming his boss had instructed him to buy it for painting a grotto, which was later proven false. He also misled his ex-girlfriend, Nancy, initially telling her that Fernanda had died accidentally after hitting her head, only to later alter his story. Evidence further revealed his attempts to manipulate witnesses, including urging Nancy to lie to authorities about the body's location as confirmed by several audio recordings. His actions following the crime also raised suspicion. On February 12th, he called his boss, Christian Rivera, requesting permission to leave and search for Fernanda. However, security footage contradicted his claim. He never left the warehouse. Instead, he was seen entering twice, carrying what appeared to be cement and mortar bags before finally leaving at 4:18 p.m. This further reinforced the prosecution's assertion that he was preparing to bury her body rather than looking for her. Throughout the investigation, Felipe displayed a chilling lack of empathy or remorse. Witnesses described him as manipulative and emotionless, with one even recalling that he joked about Fernandez, fate saying, "She's now cooking somewhere." Prosecutors argued that Felipe was a narcissistic psychopath who viewed his actions with disturbing detachment. Based on months of investigation, prosecutors pieced together Fernanda's final moments in horrifying detail. On February 10th, 2018, she left her home unaware that she was walking into a trap. Felipe, a neighbor and longtime friend she had known for over a decade, lured her to a warehouse at 1635 Lolima Street in Conchili. Carrying only her keys and phone, Fernanda had no reason to suspect the nightmare that awaited her. The evidence suggested that Felipe had premeditated the crime. In the days leading up to their meeting, he had already dug a grave in the warehouse courtyard, precisely sized to fit Fernanda's body. This level of preparation indicated that he had intended to kill her and dispose of her remains well before their encounter. Around 5:30 p.m., Fernanda arrived at the warehouse. Just 3 minutes later, at 5:33 p.m., Felipe let the dogs out, likely to ensure they wouldn't interfere with what he was about to do. Once she was inside, he betrayed her trust in an unimaginably brutal way, using his significant physical advantage. He stood over 6 feet tall while Fernanda was just 5 feet. He attacked her from behind. As she struggled, he assaulted her, then tied her up and strangled her until she lost consciousness. The official autopsy determined that Fernanda died from asphyxiation caused by strangulation. However, forensic expert Dr. Carmen Cerda later raised the disturbing possibility that she may have still been alive when she was buried. Evidence pointed to death by suffocation, likely from being tightly wrapped in cloth and forced into a fetal position that restricted her ability to breathe. Felipe believed she was dead after the violent assault, but in truth, she may have suffocated slowly in the shallow grave. Her unborn daughter, with no chance of survival, died from drowning in amniotic fluid. Every move Felipe made to conceal his crime was later traced. He had purchased cement and floor mortar, items that, along with their receipts, were eventually found at the crime scene. The fact that he left behind such vital evidence was shockingly careless. Fernandez's unborn daughter had already been given a name, chosen with love before this unimaginable tragedy. She was to be welcomed into the world as baby Josefa. On April 25, 2023, the court handed down the harshest possible sentence to Felipe Andres Rojas Lobos, qualified life imprisonment. The decision was based on the extreme cruelty of his actions, the aggravating elements of premeditation and certainty, and the critical need to preserve public confidence in the justice system. Juliana Campo Verde was characterized as a lovely and compassionate girl when she was born in Quito, Ecuador on August 21, 1993. Apart from her exceptional academic performance, Juliana also had a strong interest in integrating music into her daily life, as evidenced by the time she chose to go with her cousin Lorena to the hospital after surgery while Lorena was in excruciating pain. Singing a lullaby in their own tongue, Juliana soothed her. Things would not stay that way, though, as in 2003, when Juliana was 10 years old, she and her family decided to quit their longtime attendance at an evangelical church, reportedly on bad terms. The family began going to Oasis to Esperanza, near their home in Quito's Biloxi neighborhood. Oasis to Esperanza was an evangelical church. When Juliana was just 10 years old, she started going to the church's youth programs, which were led by Pastor Jonathan. The year 2000 saw the founding of the church. Pastor Jonathan Corrito was a part of the Corrito family-run organization. Juliana had a strong enthusiasm for her new church. Juliana was quite proud of her congregation because she was in the choir. Juliana regularly and fervently attended Pastor Jonathan's lectures and meetings. According to Juliana's mother, her heavenly daughter traveled far and wide with the church's founders, finally growing close to both Jonathan and his family. Juliana would often go out to dinner with Jonathan and his siblings, and they would stroll together in public. The girl was already joining the Corrito family in their private Christmas celebrations, not even realizing that 13 years had passed. Her mother was not alarmed by their frequent group chats on Instant Messenger, at least not according to any media accounts of the subsequent occurrence. Juliana was known to listen to Pastor Jonathan with great enthusiasm and fervor, taking his words literally and wholeheartedly. Nonetheless, the church's pastors took great care to monitor its congregants. Pastor Patricio, Jonathan's father, intended to be consulted before any family members, including Juliana's, embarked on their own initiatives or took a vacation. In certain instances, parishioners would exert pressure on their members to make a financial contribution if they failed to pay the tithe. Church members would occasionally even visit their places of employment to warn parishioners that failing to pay their tithe would result in no rewards. The pastors would contact the parishioners to inquire why the elders had not been told if they decided to take a personal trip or even just got a new job. And church officials would blame any disease or ailments that their members had on their lack of payment. In 2010, despite being able to put up with the church, Juliana and her family were becoming increasingly uneasy because the 16-year-old Juliana felt that the local pastors were abusing their power to dictate to her who her life partner would be. The fact that she had already met a partner, Fabian, whom she kept a secret from the church, did not make her feel any better. However, Juliana was kicked out of the church choir by the elders as soon as they learned about it. Rather of characterizing her expulsion from the church choir as a punishment, Pastor Jonathan explained it as a period of respite meant to help her stabilize. Juliana was extremely upset by this and would often cry by herself in her room because she felt that she had let Pastor Jonathan and her church down. But Juliana was eventually permitted to rejoin the chorus. A man who claimed to be a religious psychologist friend Juliana on Facebook in December 2011. He gave his name as Juan Solano. After Juliana approved the friend request, the two started chatting on instant messaging. Juan would inquire about Juliana's romantic history, her hobbies, if she had ever had sex, and her future intentions, among other extremely private topics. When Juliana mentioned that she intended to move out of Ecuador and start studying abroad in Argentina in the future, Juan Solano was adamantly against the idea. He persuaded Juliana not to go by telling her over instant messenger that she would be missing out on important time with her friends and family. Juliana informed Juan that some sacrifices are better avoided. Juan replied, "Take caution. Burns are a possibility." The two carried on their virtual chat. When Juan disclosed that his wife had Juliana's name and that he was a widower, Juan proceeded to question Juliana about Pastor Jonathan and the reason behind her lack of communication with him. Juan jumped to the pastor's defense, defending his acts and comparing him to a wounded lion who would offer his life for his flock. After Juliana recounted her behavior and the problems Jonathan had with her lovers, Juliana said that God had sent Juan into her life to assist her, and thanked him for his counsel. But later, Juliana would see Juan's profile picture and tell him in a single message, "You look a lot like Jonathan." Juan never replied to Juliana about the parallels, but he did send her another note later in which he abruptly informed her that she ought to wed Jonathan's brother. Juliana questioned Jonathan about this the following time she attended church, and he promised to investigate further. Jonathan informed her that she was meant to marry his brother, which was a very handy and coincidental coincidence. Because Juliana was still seeing Fabian and did not want to wed Jonathan's brother, she was distraught. She informed Fabian in the church, "They had a revelation that I have to marry someone and that I cannot disobey God," according to Fabian. Juliana and Fabian would split up soon after. The pastors would not stop pressuring Juliana to marry Israel Carreo, Jonathan's brother. In the ensuing months, telling her to go out with him and give him a chance. However, Juliana had no feelings for Israel and wondered why God would command her to wed someone she did not even know. Jonathan expressed his displeasure that she was not treating her position in this matter seriously when she voiced her reservations to him. When she inquired about her role, Jonathan answered, "Obedient daughter to be Israel's wife, what he has for me." Pastor Jonathan would turn down Juliana's request to date Fabian, stating that he was not a church member and was older than her. Juliana, who remained devoted to her faith even though she was still profoundly in love with Fabian, was crying in her room one day in February 2012 when her mother heard and inquired as to what was wrong. At last, Juliana told her mother the truth about her relationship with Pastor Jonathan. Her mother was upset to learn that Pastor Jonathan was pressuring Juliana into a marriage she did not want, and she announced that her family would be leaving the church in June 2012 after assuring Juliana that no one was pressuring her to be married. In the same month, Juliana would once more begin dating Fabian. Juliana, then 18, had recently finished her high school education and was starting to save money for college on July 7, 2012. She bought a modest store with her parents, where she sold goods related to health food. She was getting ready for work with her mother on this particular day. After sharing breakfast, they left for their respective workplaces. From their house to Mariscal Sucre Avenue, they strolled side by side. Jonathan was the person they happened to run into on their way to work. They gave him a strange, half-hearted greeting and moved on. But Pastor Jonathan resided in the northern part of Quito, and since it was early in the morning, his church was closed. Juliana's mother thought to herself how strange it was to meet him. According to her mother, Juliana was anxious and uneasy the entire time the encounter was obviously strained. When the two got to the petrol station, it was at the crossroads of Avahi Avenue and Mariscal Sucre Avenue. They then parted ways at this moment. While her mother rode the bus to work, Juliana had to walk 5 additional blocks to get to the shop. Juliana would not be seen alive again after this. Her mother's spouse called her 20 minutes later to inquire about Juliana. He claimed to have contacted her on her cell phone, but oddly, all he heard from the other end was the sound of kids playing in an adult male voice in the background instructing the kids to put down the phone because it wasn't theirs. When her mother contacted Fabian in response, he said he hadn't seen Juliana, but that he was meant to meet her that evening. Her mother began phoning friends, family, members of their new church and hospitals and clinics. But no one had noticed Juliana. Her mother tried to confront Pastor Jonathan over the phone, but he never picked up the phone. In the unlikely event that Juliana had been in an accident, and was lost to them. Juliana's family canvassed the neighborhood and paid multiple hospital visits. Nevertheless, they were unable to find her. When Juliana's mother finally called the police, she did not receive the kind of response she had hoped for. With a heartless argument that she must have gone on a rampage, the police behaved dismissively, saying they had to wait 48 hours before filing a case. Additionally, they conjectured that she might be expecting and would return in 9 months, or that she was only with her boyfriend and the family should wait for her return. Her mother would carry out her own search after the unsatisfactory police response, repeatedly phoning Juliana's cell phone, but never receiving a response. After some time, she purportedly received a text message from Juliana that said, "I met a person and I'm going with him as soon as I can. I will forward the items from the store to you." When her mother realized that Juliana wasn't with him, she went to visit Fabian and gave him the message stating that her daughter would not have written or behaved in this way. When they went to the police once more, they each encountered the same lack of response. Despite her mother's pleas that she did not send a text, the police said that Juliana's text message demonstrated that she had departed voluntarily. All the police did was tell Juliana's mother to hold off till her daughter came back. Having lost, she went back home and looked around Juliana's room for any clues as to where she might have gone, but she was unable to locate anything. When her mother arrived to their health food store the following morning, everything was in its proper place and undamaged, including the grapes that had been bought the day before and the money that had been paid for them, which was still in the safe. The parents of Holy Anna and Fabian went back to the police, but they didn't follow through, saying that Holy Anna was probably with her lover. The officer merely remarked, "Then surely she has another one." After Fabian revealed to him that he was her boyfriend, they eventually succeeded in filing a missing persons complaint in spite of the police's lack of interest. Though a prosecutor could not be assigned to the case until Monday, chances for progress remained dim. The media appeared equally indifferent when the family attempted to visit them over the weekend. The family eventually had to turn to making and putting up their own posters throughout the Biloxi neighborhood for missing folks. She was pasting flyers with Juliana's Aunt Mary Goff when a policeman approached her and told her that the neighborhood did indeed have CCTV cameras. The officer did not appear to be aware of his colleague's lack of interest in the case. In order to see if the women could see the video, he volunteered to take them to the Quito Police Headquarters. After they got to the Quito Police Headquarters, the officials would only let Juliana's mother enter to watch the video. Juliana's aunt was waiting for her outside, so she stepped inside. When Jonathan's father, Pastor Patricio Carrillo, received a call from Juliana's aunt while they were outside informing him that Juliana had vanished, he responded very strangely. "I knew that already," was his reply. "I was aware of what was going to occur beforehand. They're quitting the church, but why then?" he asked Juliana's aunt where they were at the moment. When she replied that they were at the Quito Police Headquarters, Patricio did not seem to like the response and advised the women to go to Cuenca or Ambato, Ecuador's borders with Peru and Colombia. Instead of trying to find Juliana at a police station, Patricio answered, "Why are you doubting me?" In response to Margot's question about why Juliana would be at any of these locations or why she would not want to be discovered. "Take me away right now if you want to put me in prison." It appeared that he did not want them to examine the CCTV footage or be at the Quito Police Headquarters. To the dismay of Juliana's relatives, not much seemed to come out of the CCTV footage. After receiving the missing person complaint, the prosecutor assigned an investigator to the investigation the following day. As the family was explaining what had transpired to the investigator, Pastor Patricio called Juliana's aunt once more. He informed them that he had prayed a lot for them and that in 20 to 30 minutes they will really hear from Juliana as a result of his prayers. Shortly later, a purportedly from Juliana text message saying, quote, "I'm fine," was sent to Juliana's mother. "Here I am in Cuenca. I'll let you know the address as soon as I find out. There's no internet for me." When this occurred, the investigator who was there suggested that they call her and notify her that the police were looking for her. They managed to reach her when they tried to call her mobile, but it was switched off. No more texts were ever sent to them. The family was left with more questions than answers because the investigator never recommended triangulating the transmission to determine where the text was delivered. Soon after, Juliana's mother received a call from Jonathan's sister, Michelle, informing her that her daughter had written on Facebook, "Thank you, friends, for your concerns. I want you to honor the judgments I took on my own. Don't meddle in my affairs." The mother of Juliana was skeptical that Pastor Jonathan's family had provided all of the information concerning her daughter, and she refused to accept this as fact. When she tried to access her daughter's Facebook account using her password, she discovered that it had been changed recently. The family discovered the December 2011 Facebook communication between Juliana and church psychologist Juan Solano thanks to a friend of Fabian's who assisted them in breaking into Juliana's account. According to what Juliana's family learned, Juan Solano wrote Juliana a message last month telling her not to leave the church, that her family belonged there, and that her mother was being egotistical. He went on to warn that those who quit the church die, that she and Fabian wrecked what was planned for her, and that her heart was driving her to the biggest mistake of her life. A menacing adage that stated, quote, "Then they will call me and I will not answer," was also provided by one. They detested wisdom and chose not to adopt the fear of the Lord. So when they search for me in the morning, they will not find me. Juliana's mother observed that the profile image resembled Jonathan, just as Juliana had discovered half a year earlier, and that this sounded a lot like Jonathan when he spoke with these text messages in hand. Juliana's mother went to the police on July 11th and requested that the prosecutor obtain a call record from Juliana's cell phone. She also asked that Jonathan and the Calidro family be questioned, as well as the traceability of the IP addresses that sent the text messages. In reality, the prosecutor questioned Jonathan and his family after agreeing. They were disparaging of Juliana and her mother, labeling them troublesome and claiming they were having problems at home. In addition, they said Juliana was associating with the wrong kind of people. When questioned about his whereabouts on the day Juliana vanished, Jonathan replied that he had just completed cleaning the church and had gone to Patrizio's residence. Subsequently, he altered his account and claimed that he had indeed started working as a systems engineer at the National Institute of Meritocracy. The prosecutor chose not to pursue the inquiry despite their questionable behavior, claiming that he would need to obtain permission from his own pastor to look into another church family because he too was an evangelical. Additionally, he said that because the Corrido family was a pastor's family, he was certain they were not at fault. The phone logs and data could not be saved in time due to the pastor's unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation. Pastor Jonathan went to the prosecutor's office on August 14th to give his version of events, despite the fact that the prosecutor had already concluded the session. He said that on July 9th, Juliana had unexpectedly dropped by his office at the Meritocracy Institute to let him know that she was okay and was simply hanging out with friends. Subsequently, he claims that Juliana begged him, as a pastor, to keep her presence a secret. Pastor Jonathan allegedly did so even though he is not a Catholic and is therefore not required to remain silent when someone confesses. He continued by saying that Juliana asked to use Jonathan's computer to update her Facebook status, and he asserts that the girl made a commitment to come home shortly. Pastor Jonathan stated that he recognized Juliana was experiencing what he called various problems, and he also acknowledged to the prosecutor that he had made up the fake story of Juan Solano in order to advise her or recommend positive changes in her life. Jonathan says he just proposed that Holy Anna meet with him to see if they might have a more serious relationship, denying ever trying to force her to marry his brother. He said that he had not utilized this counseling method with any other members of his flock when the prosecutor questioned him about it. After receiving his statement, the prosecution did not pursue any more charges against him. After 2 years passed with no fresh advancements in the case, Juliana's mother was eventually able to obtain the IP addresses from which the purportedly Juliana text messages were sent in 2014. To her amazement, Juliana's mother discovered that Jonathan's computer was used to send the texts. This evidence led to the reopening of the inquiry into Juliana's disappearance and the eventual organization and execution of a systematic search on May 18, 2014. After all, the authorities searched a Raviv in Guanapoyo and a valley near Quito, where his priest, Patricio, had resided. During the police raid, all of Jonathan's electronic devices, including his computer and cell phones, were taken by the authorities. They uncovered a ton of pornographic photographs on Jonathan's computer, along with numerous stored photos and videos of Juliana and other church girls. but they found no proof that Patricio or Jonathan had abducted Juliana. After that, police proceeded to the Meritocracy Institute to verify Jonathan's statement from 2 years earlier. Fortunately, the institute still had its 2012 guestbook preserved, and it revealed that Juliana had not visited the location, and none of Jonathan's colleagues remembered seeing her on that particular day. Investigators also found that Juliana's disappearance days clock-ins and outs were manipulated. They had been physically changed such that Jonathan's shift start and in times that day were unclear. Jonathan was reminded during the interview that, in contrast to Catholicism, evangelism does not have seals of secrecy. Instead, Jonathan chose to exercise his right to silence as a civilian. Following this discovery, the case began to receive serious attention from the authorities. The initial prosecutor, who had declined to look into the matter further because of his personal religious convictions, was removed at the family's request. But moving ahead, several prosecutors, rather than just one, would be appointed to the case, which resulted in administrative mistakes. 10 different prosecutors were appointed to the case between 2002 and 2017, and because of their administrative decisions, they were frequently replaced. The multiple prosecutors assigned 8 different investigators to the case, and more than 90 separate legal files were produced. Many circumstantial pieces of evidence were found against Jonathan during the lengthy inquiry, but none could be linked to him or the crime with certainty. Pastor Jonathan underwent a concerning mental assessment on September 16, 2013, before it was discovered that the IP addresses from which Juliana's communications were received originated from Jonathan's computers. The psychiatrist saw that Jonathan appeared extremely upset and nervous when forced to discuss the disappearance. He also expressed uneasiness and attempted to look easygoing and spontaneous. The quivering of his hands and jaw, the tics in his mouth, and his avoidance of eye contact all plainly indicate the emotional stress that is being displayed. The investigation also claimed that the pastor repeatedly contradicted himself. He depicted Juliana as the daughter of a troubled family in one version, and as a composed and reliable young woman in the church in another. The psychiatrist's criminal background painted Pastor Jonathan in a less than idealistic light. According to his profile, Jonathan had a sexist view of the world and was angry and irritated by Juliana's choices. Additionally, it claimed that he was tormented by compulsive impulses, and the psychiatrist is cited in the report as stating that Jonathan had performed a number of acts on Juliana Campoverde that were akin to those carried out by any kind of cult or sect. The evaluation's conclusions stated unequivocally that Jonathan was most likely the reason behind Juliana's disappearance. Jonathan had been using Juliana's cell phone chip in his own phone to listen to voicemails and make operator calls. According to information obtained by the police in 2017 using the IMEI number, they also discovered that he was the one who corresponded with Juliana's family via text message each and every time. The present prosecutor claimed that the case could not proceed since there was no body, despite the overwhelming amount of technology proof against Pastor Jonathan and the numerous quantities of circumstantial evidence at the time. The family asked for the prosecutor to be removed in January 2018. The Attorney General's office concurred and made the decision that they would choose their prosecutor carefully this time. Myra Soria was selected to be the 11th prosecutor. Myra's track record of pursuing cases involving crimes against women, especially the murders of women in Ecuador, made her the choice. In addition, they thought that Myra was far more committed to seeing justice served than any of the previous prosecutors, and she had far greater empathy for the family. Myra requested the registry of Claro, a Brazilian-Mexican telecom firm that works in Ecuador, but they were no longer in possession of it because their system had automatically erased it after a predetermined period of time to make room for new data. Rather, Myra asked for a second search warrant for Jonathan Tome. And on September 5, 2018, the police carried out another search of the pastor's house and discovered the smoking gun. When they opened the folder they had taken, they saw that Jonathan had asked for a transcript of his calls made in 2012. The paper he sought included an IMEI number, along with a list of the numbers he had phoned during this period, along with the length of each call. In light of this, Myra went back to Claro and inquired about the accuracy of the IMEI and data from Jonathan's phone. Claro responded that they were. Thus, Myra asked Claro for Juliana's cell phone call log and discovered that Juliana had made her last call on the day she vanished, using Jonathan's IMEI number. When they took control of his computer, they discovered that he would regularly look up terms like dead woman found in Quito and other related ones. Additionally, they discovered that Jonathan had looked up scopolamine preparation methods in 2012. Furthermore, 500 megabytes of porn was discovered on his computer, the machine of a purportedly devout man who frequently gave talks to the neighborhood about the perils of temptation. Following his arrest, Jonathan was brought to Quito's Flaglentia unit, where his family and Juliana's parents awaited with bated breath to see if the police would accept Jonathan's account of events and free him once more. In the room was Pastor Patricio, who appeared anxious and restless, pacing back and forth across the space with his hands behind his back and only sporadically pausing to check the time or speak with his family. Pastor Patricio once paused to look at Juliana's mother, who did her best to respond with bravery and defiance. Jonathan was questioned by the county prosecutor for 4 hours, during which time he was asked 98 questions, the most of which concerned his past and relationship with Juliana. Jonathan kept providing inconsistent answers. When questioned about why Juliana's SIM card was linked to his phone's IMEI, he simply said, "I don't know," adding that he had spent the entire day at the Meritocracy Institute on the day she vanished. All in attendance perceived him to be guilty based on his behavior and actions, and he was unable to offer a convincing explanation for how Juliana's SIM card was linked to his phone number. He was ultimately taken before the court to be formally charged with kidnapping on the same day because the police and the prosecutor, Myra, did not believe him. The judge deemed there to be sufficient proof to proceed. Thus, Jonathan was formally accused with kidnapping. The judge allowed the prosecutor's plea for him to be detained pending trial. The prosecutor quickly held a press conference, which was instantly covered by the media. The case garnered a great deal of attention throughout Ecuador. Juliana's parents thanked Myra, the police, and the prosecution for their efforts during a news conference. But in other places, Pastor Jonathan was contesting the accusations, and his relatives were adamantly defending him and characterizing his imprisonment as a form of religious persecution. However, Oasis de Esperanza, the church owned by Jonathan's family, suffered from the negative publicity surrounding the news conference, and as a result, fewer and fewer of its parishioners attended Mass, choosing to attend other churches. Jonathan's family was incensed by this since it eventually had an impact on their finances. The authorities would question Jonathan while he was being held in pretrial custody until finally pressure mounted and he confessed. On November 10, 2018, he came clean and said that he had taken Juliana hostage, but that she had died due to an unintentional fall, and that he had disposed of her body in a Bella Vista neighborhood ravine. This confession meant that the next day there would be a massive search effort involving Jonathan and Juliana's relatives and under police guard. 400 officers and investigators were used in the operation, along with a large number of search dogs and even an excavator. They went several km along the banks of the Macangara River and even down to the ravine's bed, but they found no sign of Juliana. At last, on November 11th, the searchers found human remains in a field close to the ravine, exactly where Jonathan had predicted they would be. But just a tooth, a jawbone, and a rib were discovered by the police, indicating that the remains were not complete. Even with the little number of remains, there was more than enough information to obtain a DNA sample. Juliana's relatives would be matched to this DNA sample. The prosecution would try to upgrade Jonathan's accusations from kidnapping to kidnapping resulting in death, which carries a death penalty and a worse term. The DNA results were returned on November 27th, and surprisingly, they did not match Juliana. Just as coincidentally, the exact location where Jonathan had predicted Juliana would be turned out to be the skeletal remains of someone quite different. The remains are still unidentified, and the authorities were unable to ascertain the skeleton's age, the reason for its demise, or even its gender. Because they were unable to locate Juliana's dental records, investigators were also unable to match the teeth for identification. Even though Juliana's body was missing, Jonathan was charged with kidnapping that resulted in death on November 30th, according to a revision of the original charges. Even with Jonathan's confession, the remains did not match Juliana. Jonathan, however, once more cited his right to remain silent and declined to talk to police following the search. Jonathan's father and brother, Patricio and Israel, saw the writing on the wall as a result of the thorough investigation, and they promptly left Ecuador before the prosecution could ask them to testify or even file charges against them. The prosecutor thought the two had probably fled to the United States, but on December 28th, an arrest order was issued for them. We still don't know Pastor Patricio's whereabouts in Israel. On December 21st, the prosecution asked the judge for authorization to search Jonathan's house and dig up his garden in order to gather forensic evidence. This request was approved. And while forensic experts used luminol to check Jonathan's home's inside, police started excavating his garden in an attempt to find Juliana's remains. When the luminol was sprayed in Jonathan's restroom, it found signs of blood. It is believed that they were not a match because the excavation of Jonathan's garden produced no results, and there is no mention of blood samples matching Juliana. Finally, Jonathan's trial would start on July 3, 2019. The primary contention of the defense was that Jonathan was only guilty of kidnapping and that any proof of his having committed a murder was simply circumstantial because there was no body, even in spite of his confession. Myra, the prosecutor, maintained that Jonathan was personally responsible for Juliana's death and requested the maximum punishment, despite the defense's assertion that the absence of a body did not imply a crime. In order to prevent another crime like this, she further asked that Oasis to Esperanza Church be closed. Juliana's family received compensation in the amount of $262,800, and that the sentence be publicized throughout evangelical groups. Despite not being a properly ordained pastor, the prosecution contended that Jonathan exploited his influence inside a religious organization to deceive Juliana, who was a devout follower. In order to regularize pastors' ordination, the prosecutor also pushed for the creation of a registry. Despite the fact that no body had been discovered, forensic and medical examiner Louis Hocco was the first witness to be called to testify. When asked about Jonathan's pretrial confession, the forensic examiner responded, quote, "Defended myself to prevent her from continuing to attack me. I grabbed her hands, then her arm. I touched her shoulder with my hands. I gave her a tight pull on the neck, causing her to stumble back and take a severe knock to the head. She remained still after that." Jonathan claimed that this occurred in his driveway, and the medical examiner was questioned about the plausibility of this account. He said it would not be physiologically possible for a lady weighing 143 pounds or 65 kilograms as Juliana did to die quickly from a fall like the one Jonathan recounted. The medical examiner contended that Juliana would not have died quickly as Jonathan claimed, but rather would have passed away days later if she had fallen backwards and sustained brain damage as a result of the fall. The medical examiner contended that Juliana could have suffered a complex fracture to her skull if she had been pushed or strangled. But this was not what would have happened if someone had fallen accidentally. Elizabeth Rodriguez, Juliana's mother, was another prosecution witness. She described Jonathan's stockish behavior and deceptive techniques to the court. She described how Jonathan's father called Juliana's aunt telling her that she would hear from the missing Juliana in 20 to 30 minutes, and how they later received a text supposedly from Juliana saying she was fine. She also described how his family would repeatedly contact her in an attempt to obstruct or mislead the subsequent investigation and search. The fact that Jonathan had been sending those texts on his phone and that Juliana had not only not been well, but had passed away by then was only discovered later in the investigation. The Talaroxes who conducted Jonathan's psychiatric evaluation in 2013 was the second witness to testify. In his testimony, he claimed that Jonathan had taken advantage of Juliana's religion and had psychologically manipulated her. Additionally, he claimed that Jonathan had presented himself as a powerful, vision-capable prophet who possessed supernatural abilities, and that he had made Juliana feel bad about having ambitions and goals outside of his church while going under the fictitious name Juan Solano. The doctor restated his belief that Juliana was a victim and that the Oasis de Esperanza Church was more akin to a cult than a legitimate church. He went on to say that he thought Jonathan harbored a secret affection for Juliana. The prosecution contended that on July 7, 2012, Jonathan had approached Juliana alone and had drugged her with scopolamine before putting her into his vehicle and taking her to a motel where he may have tried to have sex with her before killing her. possibly during an argument. This was based on his search history, both before and after Juliana's disappearance, as well as his previous dubious relationship with Juliana. A telephone analyst was called to testify by the prosecution. She stated that both Juliana and Jonathan's cell phones were in the same vicinity at the same time, and that their triangulation points coincided with 4 different times, with the last point most likely being when Jonathan inserted Juliana's SIM card into his own phone. During cross-examination with Italo Rojas, the defense questioned the veracity of the text between Juliana and Juan Solano. The psychiatrist responded that both Jonathan and Jonathan's wife had verified in 2012 that Jonathan was the person behind the Juan Solano account. Italo Rojas stated that he was unaware of any incidents in which Jonathan had physically assaulted Juliana. The defense then questioned the expert on whether Jonathan had ever verbally threatened her. The defense questioned the veracity of the conversations, pointing out that they were obtained as a consequence of the family using one of Fabian's friends to hack her Facebook account. Although the defense claimed to have over 400 witnesses, they ultimately only called 4 to testify. Pastor Vicente Munoz, the national representative of the Foursquare Gospel Church, which Duasista Esperanza and Jonathan's family were members of, was one of the individuals summoned to the platform. In his testimony, he stated that he had never approved the appointment of any assistant pastors for the church, just Patricio Carrillo and his spouse as pastors. The prosecution inquired about the purported confessional seal in relation to Jonathan's alleged protection as a pastor, since Jonathan had previously used it as justification for his failure to testify. According to Vicente's testimony, the Foursquare Church did not maintain the privacy of their pastors' or members' confessions. After deliberating for 5 hours, 3 judges decided on July 17, 2019, finding Jonathan Guarrido guilty of kidnapping with the intent to kill and sentencing him to 25 years in jail. They recommended the creation of a national registry of pastors and mandated that Jonathan pay Julianne's family received compensation in the amount of $100,000 US. In addition, they mandated Oasis to Esperanza's permanent closure. Even though Juliana's body was never discovered, her family was eventually able to see justice after a grueling 7 years. The police are mandated by the court order to keep looking until Juliana's body is located. Jonathan filed an appeal against his sentence, but on March 13, 2020, the provincial court denied it. In addition, the court ordered that Foursquare Gospel Community Church pay for the installation of a memorial plaque at the former church building, of which Jonathan had previously held the position of pastor. This decision was made in addition to the compensation agreement between the parties. Following this appeal, Jonathan filed a second appeal, this time to the Supreme Court of Ecuador. They also denied his appeal on November 16, 2020, which meant that Jonathan had run out of options for appealing and would have to stay behind bars until his sentence was completed. Regular meetings are held to consider where to search next and how to carry out the search in light of the court ruling directing that the hunt for Juliana's body be continued indefinitely. Another extensive search operation, including hundreds of officers and search dogs, took place on April 15, 2021. The identical spot that Jonathan had first identified in his confession was searched by police. Using canines trained to seek for human remains, police teams swept a steep ravine near Bella Vista for 3 hours. Although they marked 6 locations, spaced roughly 50 meters apart, no additional evidence was found after thorough inquiry. The last search was conducted in November 2021. However, it produced no results. Juliana's body has not been located as of yet. The whereabouts of Patricio and Israel Carrillo, as well as the identity, gender, age, and cause of death of the remains discovered during the November 2018 search are still unknown. The 10th anniversary of Juliana's abduction and probable murder was July 7, 2022. Patricia Carnahan, the body of an unnamed woman, was discovered in a state park in 1979. The case remained unsolved for many years. It wasn't until 2023 that important breakthroughs such as improvements in forensic science and interstate cooperation gave fresh insight into the enduring enigma and led to the attacker's prosecution. The date was September 28, 1979 at the Sugar Pine Point State Park campground on Lake Tahoe. A woman's body was found, She looked as though she had been strangled and had been severely battered and wounded. She was wearing some jewelry and was probably in her early 40s. She carried a wristwatch, a necklace of a deer, and a few rings. The three individuals who found her dead did not contact the police right away. Rather, they made a call to a nearby newspaper and disappeared. After that, the reporter notified law enforcement. Due to outstanding arrest warrants, police discovered that the three guys had neglected to report their discovery. For this particular offense, they were all exonerated. Remarkably, an autopsy would show that Jane Doe was probably still alive when they found her. She was subjected to an SA kit test since it seemed like she had been abused. To gather evidence, these kits include sterile containers, combs, microscope slides, collection bags, and other items. With the aid of these kits, victims' hairs, saliva, blood, and other bodily fluids are removed in order to establish the assault and identify the culprit. It was discovered that she had taken significant hits to her body, and there were defensive wounds that showed she had retaliated. Around the picnic area on the western side of the lake, there were several indications of fighting, and the victim misplaced one of her flip-flops in her attempt to flee her attacker. The investigating cops spotted an empty beer bottle beside the body, which they mistakenly bagged despite finding very little other evidence. Forensic technology was not as developed in 1979 as it is now. The body was kept for a very long time in the morgue and the evidence was filed away. The decision was made to bury the unidentified woman in an unmarked grave in a potter's field in El Dorado County, since no one came forward to claim her. As it was then, Lake Tahoe has always been a well-liked vacation spot. People from all over the world constantly flock to the beaches and campsites, so it was challenging to find this woman. She can be from wherever. There was no way to find out who she was or how she got there at the time because police did not find a car or any other possessions. Due to technological limitations, it was deemed a cold case and was withdrawn from consideration. The victims and the beer bottle's DNA were examined years later in 1986 when the technology of DNA testing was developed. It was evident the attacker owned the bottle, but until decades later, nothing more was done. In 2014, investigating officer John Gaines took up this case some 36 years after it began. He reopened Jane Doe's files from Lake Tahoe. It opened cases from the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s as part of El Dorado County's cold case unit. He dug out the body in the Jane Doe case at Lake Tahoe. In an effort to identify her, he printed pictures of her jewelry to be distributed to the public while accompanied by a forensic anthropologist from California State University, Chico. Local publications ran the photos, but there were few leads. Gaines took attention of the necklace and discovered that the deer necklace was actually a high pendant, symbolic of the Jewish life emblem. According to him, Elvis Presley used to wear a pendant similar to this while performing. Gaines tried his luck with the local Jewish community using a high pendant as a lead. Rabbi Morty Rickler, a local rabbi in Lake Tahoe who had recently opened a Chabad center, expressed surprise when police contacted him. Since the Chabad is seen as a Jewish community center, cops are not frequently seen there. It is a sacred location of tranquility and purity. After hearing the details of the situation, Rabbi Rickler was eager to assist and inform the neighborhood. When the body was found in 1979, very few Jewish families had recently moved to the Lake Tahoe region. Over 1,000 Jews lived in the region and there were now 2 synagogues. 3 plainclothes officers with firearms and badges paid Rabbi Yossi Grossbaum a visit in September 2015. Gaines arrived in Folsom, California, hoping to make contact with the victims' living relatives. In Northern California and throughout the state, Rabbi Grossbaum disseminated the information. Eventually, a family identified the pendant in the press and stepped forward. The claimed victim's daughter and the remains underwent a DNA test, and the results showed a match. Patricia Carnahan, who would have been 35 years old at the time of her death, was eventually identified as the body. Patricia, who was originally from Virginia, had left on a solitary road trip through California. She had a red Volkswagen bus under her belt. She never made it home, despite having called her family to let them know she was on her way. In October 1979, a month later, The family filed a missing persons report. Her vehicle was retrieved from a Venice, California dealership. It appeared that the car had been left unattended in the lot. Regretfully, no connection was established because she was a Virginia missing persons case. In addition, the perpetrator's DNA and Patricia's DNA profile were deposited into CODIS, the FBI's unified DNA system, but no one could match that for many more years. After that, her body was given to her family so they could bury her properly. And 26 years after her tragic death, she was placed to rest. But the offender continued to be at large. Years later, the attacker was apprehended due to a totally different series of events. The Washington State SAKIT initiative, which sought to reactivate abuse inquiry testing from the 1970s onward in an effort to apprehend the offenders, received financing from the state of Washington in 2023. One of the few police departments with full-time personnel dedicated to abuse probe test cases was the Spokane Police Department. More than 250 of the more than 1,500 kits in the SPD were matched using the combined DNA index approach. This resulted in an enormous discovery. A man in Spokane was charged in 1994 of having his way with a homeless woman. She sent the police a complaint on the occurrence, had herself tested to confirm her allegation, and designated Harold Carpenter as the person who had attacked her. He was arrested for coercing her against her will in the second degree, but the woman chose not to pursue legal action. Therefore, the case was dropped. Harold Carpenter asserted that he did not defile her and that their relationship was consensual. His word was therefore in opposition to hers. The test kit was uploaded into CODIS after being filed away. The DNA on the system matched Patricia Carnahan's body and the empty beer bottles. But the woman who had filed the complaint had long ago passed away. After more research, Carpenter was identified as being close to the incident on September 29, 1979, when he was detained for driving under the influence in Susanville, California. In addition to being charged for a second non-consensual event involving a woman in 1994, Carpenter was arrested for a number of misdemeanors between 1990 and 1993. Prior to his divorce in 1998, he was married and resided in Sandpoint. She had accused him of domestic abuse. He was charged with possession of illegal narcotics, reckless driving, multiple DUIs, and in disturbing the peace in Bonner County between 1998 and 2018. Other than one DUI in 2000, he didn't have anything on file in Washington. After being made homeless in 2016, Carpenter moved to Spokane Street. He was detained as a suspect in a different non-consensual case in Spokane County in 2018. However, the allegations were not validated. His homelessness was discussed in an article that appeared in the Inlander in 2020. You simply got through it. Simply step outside and attempt to avoid the snow, rain, or other elements. He was under suspicion for an alleged groping incident in 2022, but once more, no arrest was made. He relocated to Spokane's downtown Park Tower apartments. El Dorado County investigators now had a reason to make an arrest of him, and the Spokane Police Department assisted in Carpenter's whereabouts. The 63-year-old was apprehended on March 1, 2023, for the murder of Patricia Carnahan, and he was brought to justice as a result of the cooperation of multiple states' agencies. The Spokane case was not pursued because of the statute of limitations, and no charges were brought against him in that specific case. He is being held in Spokane County Jail without bond while he waits to be extradited to El Dorado so that he can face charges for his actions. The long-running cold case was eventually solved. Thanks to forensic technology advancements and cross-state agency cooperation, Patricia Carnahan's attacker was identified 44 years later. Nearly 50 years later, the mystery surrounding the 1979 Lake Tahoe Jane Doe has been solved. Moving on to the next case. Sabrina Underwood, nestled in the northwestern Arkansas Ozark Mountains, Huntsville, Arkansas, was a small, tight-knit rural town in the 1990s. The town was a place where community ties were strong and life proceeded at a slower pace compared to larger urban regions. Its character was profoundly anchored in its historical and agricultural traditions. Throughout the 1990s, Huntsville's community life was characterized by a strong sense of solidarity. Locals were frequently acquainted, and the town's social fabric was knitted by a variety of neighborhood activities. Every year, the people of Huntsville eagerly anticipated the town fairs, parades, and festivals. These events gave participants a chance to socialize and cement their ties to the community in addition to offering entertainment. This rustic setting served as the setting for the tragic story of Sabrina Underwood. On January 20th, 1991, Sabrina Underwood, then 19 years old, vanished from sight after her mother let her off at the U.S. Highway 41262 in Boone County, close to Bear Creek. At the time, Sabrina was traveling to Calico Rock to see her boyfriend who was serving time in jail. The neighborhood was shocked by Sabrina's abduction, and her mother never saw her again. There were months of tense anticipation after Sabrina vanished. Then, on April 8, 1991, a somber finding stunned the town. A hunter discovered human remains close to the Gum Spring Cemetery, northwest of Little Rock, along with hair, underwear, and an ear stud. It was determined that the bones belonged to Sabrina Underwood, whose destiny was very different from what she had intended to accomplish. The cause of Sabrina's death was initially ruled as unknown, which sparked a laborious and devastating investigation. Law enforcement agents put in a great deal of effort in interviewing suspects, following up on leads, and trying to piece together the details of her case. Their diligent work went unrewarded as the case eventually fizzled out, leaving Huntsville under a cloud of unanswered mystery for years to come. The darkness would not lift for over 30 years. A crucial tip surfaced in July 2022, launching the probe once more. A startling and unsettling confession letter was in the possession of a local lawyer whose client was serving time in an Arkansas state prison. When his estranged wife, Kirsty Headley, was killed in 2018, the client, Rick Allen Headley, was already serving a life sentence. The confession letter gave the long-abandoned case new life by revealing graphic details of Sabrina Underwood's terrible demise. Rick Allen Headley was questioned by detectives right away regarding the contents of the confession letter. His shocking information would throw light on the horrific crime that had been hidden for almost 30 years. Headley confessed to the crime, and his account read like a terrifying story that had come to pass in the sleepy town of Huntsville. Headley's admission, according to the affidavit, gave a bleak impression of Sabrina's last moments. At a gas stop, he said, Sabrina approached him and asked for a ride. Hadley would be plagued by the events of that ride for years to come. In a startling change of events, Sabrina approached Hadley and startlingly demanded money, threatening to harm him if he rejected her advances. Hadley told a terrifying story of the events leading up to Sabrina's terrible end. Following their sexual session in his truck, Sabrina told him she would require a large payment from him, or she would disclose that he had hurt her. Headley was taken aback by this news and realized that trouble was ahead. The subsequent occurrences were really terrifying. Though the seriousness of the situation weighed hard on him, Headley made the decision to leave Sabrina behind and drive away. He felt that he had to prevent her from ruining his life. At this time, he attacked her outside the truck with great violence. He carried her into a little graveyard that was concealed from onlookers' gaze in a startling and gory act. The account of the actual slaughter is really frightening. Headley admitted to severing Sabrina's neck with a Rambo-style knife that had a compass attached at the end. He gave a vivid account of how he snapped the bone and removed her head from her body by hammering on the knife blade with a rock. He said that his goal was to make sure Sabrina never found out what had happened to her. After doing this horrific deed, Headley hid Sabrina's body from sight by covering it with logs and foliage. Then he collected her possessions and put them close to her body. The knife and rock used in the horrific act were thrown into a stretch of woods many miles distant. Headley took off his blood-stained clothes at his mountain home apartment, threw them in a garbage bag, and showered to rid himself of Sabrina's blood. His garments were in the garbage bag that was thrown in the dumpster behind the mall. Headley then walked out of the place. In addition to sending shockwaves across Huntsville, Headley's confession gave Sabrina's family, who had suffered through decades of suffering and uncertainty, some degree of comfort and closure. A much-needed turning point in the pursuit of justice in the unsolved Sabrina Lynn Underwood case has been reached with the apprehension of Rick Allen Headley. He is currently being charged in relation to Sabrina's case, and the community is eagerly awaiting his anticipated court appearance in Fulton County Circuit Court in late November 2023. The case serves as a sobering reminder of both the small-town community's unwavering spirit and the police enforcement's unwavering loyalty. Moving on to the next case. Shelley and Warner imagine a small town in the summer of 1980 where everyone was laughing and life seemed to go on without a hitch. However, in the heart of this town, called Mishawaka, a terrible tragedy occurred that would haunt the residents for the rest of their lives. Shelley and Warner, at 15 years old, vanished from sight on June 15, 1980, leaving her family devastated. Her lifeless body with a gunshot wound to the head was discovered next to the Madison Road railroad tracks 10 agonizing days later. In a quiet village, how could such a horrific act take place? Who may have committed this heinous act? The bustling commercial city of Mishawaka in northern Indiana has a certain charm all its own. Thanks to Penn Township's ideal location along the St. Joseph River in St. Joseph County, everyday life is set against a breathtaking backdrop. With a population of roughly 51,000, the city is delighted to be called the Princess City. In Mishawaka, new residential subdivisions and established neighborhoods coexist. The city was carefully designed to promote a strong sense of community and connectedness. The people there are well known for their generosity, camaraderie, and mutual love of adventure. A horrific incident that irrevocably ruined Mishawaka's tranquility and etched its name in the annals of tragedy occurred even in this close-knit community. On July 4, 1964, Shelley and Warner was born. Although not much is known about her early life, she shared a home in Mishawaka, Indiana, with her mother, Kathleen Warner. Following the split of her parents, Shelley was raised by her mother. Her mother was an elementary school teacher in the neighborhood. At the tender age of 15, Shelley enrolled at Mishawaka High School, where she played sports and sang in the band. She was single and had no enemies that she was aware of. Young Shelley had a bright future ahead of her and was motivated to achieve her objectives. She was optimistic and lively. At the moment, Shelley was brimming with youthful energy and enthusiasm for life's possibilities. She had no idea that fate had other ideas for her. Mishawaka's quiet routine was upended on June 16, 1980 by an occurrence that would leave the community irrevocably traumatized. Shelley and Warner, a 15-year-old Mishawaka high school student, started out on what was meant to be a normal day. She drove her 1973 Volkswagen 2 miles to the nearest Wilkes grocery, wishing her mother Kathleen a fond farewell. Time passed and there was an eerie calm surrounding the Warner residence. Shelley hasn't returned to her house in more than an hour. Kathleen quickly began to experience terror and anxiety. Kathleen waited a little longer till she was forced to phone the police due to her desperation. Her voice faltered when she told the authorities about her daughter's disappearance. At first, the Mishawaka Police Department handled the case as a missing persons case because they believed it included a young runaway. But as time passed, a horrifying insight became clear. After a torturous 24 hours, Shelley was still nowhere to be found. As their degree of concern grew, investigators quickly modified the investigation status to suspected abduction. There were no overt indicators of foul play, which left detectives perplexed in those early hours of desperation. Kathleen's first call was reported as a regular missing person, but nothing had changed by the next day. Mishawaka town was now under the shadow of suspicion, setting the stage for an unsettling mystery that would unfold over many years. Following an immediate inquiry, the authorities learned that Shelley had arrived to Wilt's supermarket on June 16th of that year. At approximately 1:30 p.m., she was seen shopping for groceries, and at approximately 2:00 p.m., she was seen exiting the store. She made her way to her car, which was parked roughly 50 feet from the store's entrance. But things took a turn for the worst as soon as she got into her car. A man with blonde hair, who appeared to be between 16 and 18 years old, with a height of 5'7" and a weight of approximately all 130 pounds, was observed skulking around the shop. The young man allegedly approached Shelley's automobile further closely. According to witnesses, abruptly he took over the driving and shoved Shelley into the passenger seat. They claim that Shelley looked taken aback by the abrupt intrusion. The witnesses could only see the man's back. As a result, it was difficult to tell if Shelley was in danger or if someone was using a weapon to silence her. Shelley was in the passenger seat when the man quickly drove off. It was an astonishing and frightening conduct that left bystanders perplexed. Anxious family members and friends launched a big collective hunt to see if anyone might learn anything about the missing little child. Authorities issued a drawing of the first suspect based on the witness's statement in an attempt to enlist the public's assistance. A terrible discovery made a few hours later made them even more afraid of the unknown. Shelley's automobile was discovered abandoned in the parking lot of the neighboring OSS Shull, Indiana shopping center. There was no trace of a scuffle inside the car, and Shelley was not present. As investigators attempted to piece together what had transpired, they kept looking for information. 2 young females were exploring a wooded region outside of South Bend, Indiana, after 10 days of suffering and frustration when they saw an awful sight. A young woman's half-nude body was discovered in a ditch next to the railroad tracks. The young lady was later identified as Shelley and Werner by dental records. It was evident from the scene that she had died there. 2 close-range shots in her were fired with a large-caliber gun. The investigation was a crazy journey with lots of leads and no leads. Hypnosis was the final desperate measure the police took in their quest for answers. For witnesses from the grocery shop were put under hypnosis in the hopes that they might recall important details regarding Shelley's kidnapping. The first suspect was given a fresh sketch after these hypnosis sessions, which revealed that he had been dropped off at the business and looked to be hitchhiking. Prior to entering the store, Shelley was allegedly observed talking to 2 young women by the witnesses. However, no one was aware of the identities of those 2 women or their potential connection to Shelley's kidnapping. Every attempt was made by law enforcement to capture the criminal. However, they were not successful. Many men who fit the description were taken in by the police. However, none of them could be recognized in a lineup as the kidnapper because neither the man who dropped off the suspect nor the 2 young women Shelley had spoken to could be found. The authorities were frustrated and the case remained unresolved. The ledge eventually dried up, ending the inquiry. The murder of Shelley had long puzzled the investigators. Her cause of death remained a mystery, and she appeared to be an ordinary high school student. It's interesting to note that witnesses claimed Shelley seemed shocked when the man got into her car. It was impossible to rule out the idea that she knew who killed her. Shelley Werner's kidnapping and murder soon became a cold case, a long-hanging, terrible mystery that plagued Mishawaka. The investigation was taken over by the Cold Case Division of the Mishawaka Police Department following the Saint. In late 2021, the Joseph County Metro Homicide Unit was dissolved. Their mission was to solve the riddle that had troubled them for years. With time, Shelley Werner's unsolved murder has cast a long shadow. However, a significant witness came forward in April 2023, 43 years later, throwing new light on the horrifying case and offering a ray of hope in the shadows. At last, the witness, a woman who had been silent out of fear for her family's safety, missed her opportunity to speak up. This witness had been intimidated by the suspect. In order to solve the case, detectives Dave Dossman, Tim Corbett, and Sam Walsh worked non-stop, according to Jim Campbell. The testimony of the witness was a paradigm-shifting discovery. She identified the 3 people in charge of killing Shelley, but the authorities withheld their identities. It was shocking to learn that Shelley knew very little about these individuals. Since they were older than she was, she most likely only knew their family. However, the authorities have not disclosed the reason for her injuries or the perpetrator. 2 of the suspects died over the years. The fact that one had died in 2001, the second had also perished in 2010, and the third had vanished into thin air had not previously been known to the detectives. The inquiry into Shelley's kidnapping and subsequent murder was reopened as a result of this new information. When investigators looked more closely into the past of the 3 individuals, they discovered a horrible history of violence. Confirming the first witness report, these men seemed to have played a direct role in the untimely death of Shelley. The witness only felt safe talking to the authorities after 2 of the accused had died. The police eventually found out. For the aim of investigating unresolved homicide cases like Shelley's, the Mishawaka Police Department established a cold case team in January 2022, consisting of former South Bend homicide detectives. This team worked very hard to locate further witnesses and gather evidence to back up the initial witness statement. However, upon closer inspection, they learned that the third suspect died in 2018. The fact that 3 men were implicated in Shelley and Warner's kidnapping and murder was a significant revelation. It demonstrated the importance of a witness' bravery in coming forward almost 40 years after the horrific event. The witness was motivated by the fact that 2 of the suspects had died and the third had disappeared. The fear and intimidation these suspects had used over the years to conceal crucial information added to the anguish of Shelley's family and the neighborhood. Cold case investigator Jim Campbell discussed the difficulties witnesses faced and how family intimidation had suppressed their testimony. Despite the fact that the 3 suspects' involvement was clearly shown by the investigators' testimony and evidence, there was a significant issue that was unavoidable. Since all 3 suspects had already passed away, how could the investigators carry out their investigation and provide Shelley's family with closure and justice? The St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office reviewed the evidence and declared it conclusive, closing the case. It did not take long to realize that the dead could not face legal repercussions. Aside from their age and acquaintance with Shelley, not much information was available regarding the suspects. However, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office ruling provided resolution. Though the suspects were deceased, there was optimism that the truth would come to light and Shelley's family could finally rest in peace. The witnesses' vital knowledge set off a coincidental chain of events that resulted in additional witnesses and evidence. The St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office stated that although DNA testing was unable to produce a conclusive match, other evidence and statements were vital. Unfortunately, because of their demise, the suspects' identities remain a mystery, making it impossible to press charges. Ultimately, individuals dedicated to attaining justice had not allowed the passing of time to erode their determination. The murder of Shelley Inn. Warner had been solved because of the investigators' perseverance and the bravery of a witness who stepped forward to reveal a terrible chapter in Mishawaka's past. The verdict in the Shelley Inn. Warner case caused a spectrum of feelings in those who were directly engaged. The investigators who had toiled for years to sit with Lee in order to find the truth found some solace in the case's ending. Tim Corbett, one of the cold case investigators, remarked, "I hope she's sitting next to God. I am grateful to the police, the public, and all those who assisted with the case." Even still, there remained a persistent sense of sadness until the case's end. Family members of Shelley remained silent about the updates since they were understandably private in their loss. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe that justice has actually been done? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. Moving on to the next case.